Before Europeans ever went to Africa in a large way, they made depictions of animals and even humans looking like depictions written by ancient Romans and ancient Greeks. This gives us an indicator of how little they knew about Africa. But this is asymmetrical, meaning while the Europeans had no real information, even as low as West Africa, this was not true the other way around. Africans were well aware of Europeans. And this statement is not empty handed. It comes with a lot of information. One that you see from Muslims and from Europeans and Africans themselves. If we look at this map that is after the exploration of Africa, we can see that there are multiple depictions of places that actually existed. So you see the Kilwa, you see Africa, you see Mani Congo, you see Mali, you see Libya, and all other places that are written. But what have they not gotten rid of? Well, if you zoom in, you can see there is a man with one eye sitting there. That is a blemi. They believed so much in the ancients that they thought, well, since they were right about a lot of the stuff in this region, they were not even aware that Negroes lived in this area. Since they were right about most of Africa, they must be right about the blemis, and all we have to do is find them. Another thing that they were wrong about were rhinoceroses. They assumed there were unicorns in Africa, and of course, griffins and all kinds of animals that they had heard about. How disappointing it must be to get to Africa and realize that not only did the Africans fully map out Africa, but none of the mythological creatures can be trusted. It makes you feel like you should not trust the ancients. Unfortunately for them, they had to, because that was one of the four pieces they were going with. By the way, when I say European, I mean all Europeans. I'm including the Ottomans in here. For example, this is an Ottoman depiction in the Piri map from the 1400s. And you can see depicted is a unicorn, is a blemi, a person with his face is on his chest. It's a blemi and a meerkat. The Ottomans were unaware of the Swahili coast. They had no idea it was there. So how did they collaborate together? We'll get to that. The second thing is the Europeans who had once traveled back and forth within Europe had seen black Africans and wrote about them all the time, right, as Moors. But why? Why is it that Africans could travel all the way to Europe, but when it came to the Europeans, they were stuck in Europe? Obviously, there were a few people who made it past. I mean, Marco Polo is a great example. And even Marco Polo's example is depicting of Africans being able to travel back and forth between Europe and Africa. Because of this, we know the 1400s all the way to the 1600s as the age of exploration. And while it is true that this was the age of exploration for Europeans, it was not for the rest of the world. For example, we find all over the place Ethiopians depicting Europeans not only in their temples, but also in their notes and books and spell books. So they depict themselves and sometimes they depict Europeans. The obvious reason for this is because the Europeans were Christians as well. But what was going on at the same time in Europe? Well, Europeans had dreamed up a person named Prester John who lived somewhere in Ethiopia. And book after book after book after book from Europe was trying to figure out a way to get to Prester John. In other words, they basically confess that they did not know how to get to Ethiopia. Meanwhile, the Ethiopians would travel back and forth to Europe all the time. Now, to make sure, I want you to understand that I'm not talking about 1100s, I'm not talking about 1300s, I'm not talking about 1400s. I'm talking about 800 AD. So 800 AD till today, the Africans were fully aware of Europe and traveled there all the time. In fact, in the Zanj rebellion that happened, one of the big threats at the time was the idea, the concept of the Zanj rebellion going so dominant, getting so dominant that they dominate the whole region, making it easy for Europeans to come in and join forces with the Zanj people, something that was not thought about deeply before the Zanj rebellion happened. Now, the Zanj people, you have to understand, who lived inside of the Middle East, so the Zanj people who caused this rebellion, some of them were very free people. In fact, the leader was free, but he was a Somali, he was not a Zanj. This person knew about the world. He knew about India, he knew about Europe, he knew about every other place in the world. But these Zanj also made back and forth trips between Africa and the Middle East, bringing back the information that they had learned from other places. This isn't just a small thing. As you will see later, Turks are well known in Africa, even though they pretty much stole the word Zanj, making Zingi a Turkish word, and of course, there's never been that many Turks in from Africa anyway. The Turks only heard that the Swahilians were Muslims when they joined forces with them in later years, but in real life, the Swahili people had long heard about the Turks, and again, there's evidence for this. Now, of course, the question should be, if Europeans are surrounded by Muslims and the Ethiopians are surrounded by Muslims, how did the faraway Ethiopians have any contact with the Europeans to the point where the Europeans knew they could trust them? Well, it wasn't a matter of knowledge, like I said, they had a matter of faith. And one of these matters of faith is clearly depicted by a one Al Yaqubi. Al Yaqubi being an explorer and someone who wrote about the geographies of not only his land but the Indian Ocean. So much so that when he, when gazing at the Indian Ocean, he could not decide whether to call it the Ethiopian Ocean or the Indian Ocean because they would travel back and forth between each other. It happened so much that he even made up or changed a little bit of a story from the Bible about Zerah the Ethiopian. According to this biblical story, Zerah the Ethiopian attacked Israel, aided by an Indian king of an unknown name. You can see this clearly written down here in Ali Yaqubi's book. And he says, this is a paraphrase from the Bible, he displayed behavior obedient to God. He forbade fornication and punished people for it. And for other immorality, he expelled from his kingdom anyone who worshipped idols, even driving out his mother. When the word reached him that she was worshipping idols, in his time, Zerah became king of Ethiopia, and the king of India advanced towards Jerusalem. But God sent a punishment and destroyed Zerah, and the king of India, Asa, reigned for 40 years. The children of Israel are to have used the wood of the Indians' weapons as fuel for 7 years after Asa killed them. Many writings like this convinced both the Arabs and the Europeans that the Ethiopians were part of the group that was created to save both the Jewish religion and Christianity from the Muslims. This created a bit of a war between these two tribes, even in 800 AD, only 200 years after the formation of Islam. A little bit of a story, really. Now, because Al Yaqubi obviously was an Arab, A lot of the writings that he wrote were from the perspective of the Arabs. Now, they were not necessarily incorrect, but they were biased for Arab writings. Let's read this quick one, which will depict for us how much Arabs knew about the world at the time and how much connection the Indian Ocean gave towards all of the people located in those regions. I have begun with Iraq because it is the center of the world, the navel of the earth. I reported about Baghdad because it is the center of Iraq and the greatest city, one which has no peer in the east or the west of the earth in size, importance, prosperity, abundance of waters, and salubrious climate, and because it is inhabited by all varieties of mankind, and urban and rural folk who have immigrated to it from all countries, near and far. People from the remotest parts of the earth have preferred it to their homelands. People from every country have residential quarters there and a place for trade and for business. What can be found together in no other city in the world comes together there. The two great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, flow along its borders, so that goods and provisions come to it by land and by water with such ease that every object of trade which can be exported from the east or the west, whether from Islamic or non-Islamic lands, make its way there. So many goods are imported to it from China, India, Sind, Tibet, the country of the Turks, Daylam, and the country of the Khazars, which is another version of Turks, Ethiopia, and other countries, that there may be more of a commodity there than in the country from which it is exported. Indeed, so much can be found and obtained there that it is as if the earth bounties had been conveyed there, the world's riches amassed there, and the blessings of the universe perfected there. Now, it's important to understand that Ali Yakubi believed in the Shem, Ham, and Japheth video, which I will talk about in a companion video with this one, where he believed that all people from Africa came from one of the sons of Noah, and then the rest, and then the rest. This will be detailed later. And so, in his opinion, everyone of Africa was of a dark skin and they lived completely in that region. Something that we should draw from that is the fact that he is saying that there are voluntary people from all nations who would come in and land within Baghdad. A very important point, which is denied a lot of the time, that people moved there through slavery. But as early as 800 AD, we have someone writing about the voluntary movement. But this is not the only writing we have of it from him specifically. He speaks of China. So if the first place is Baghdad, right, and all of these other countries travel from Baghdad, and in fact, India and the Zanj regions or the Swahili coast used to battle to get ambergris into Baghdad first because they were in competition. Ambergris from these two coasts, the Zanj and the Indian Ocean or the Indian coasts, would make it all the way to Europe and, of course, Baghdad, China, and places like that. And it was very valuable because it had a pleasant smell. If we read here in the middle, he said, after the ambergris of Al Sharah comes the ambergris of Zanj, which is brought from the land of the Zanj to Aden. It is a white ambergris. After it comes the ambergris of Al Salahat, which is varies in quality. The best kind of Salahiti ambergris is grayish blue and very greasy. This is the kind used in perfumes called Galia. After Salahiti ambergris comes the ambergris of Kakali, which is bright gray, of excellent aroma, fine looking, light, and slightly dry. It is inferior to the Salahiti and the etiquette neither for Galia perfumes nor for purification, except out of necessity. However, it is adequate for powders and plasters. This ambergris comes from the sea of Kakala to Aden. After Kakala ambergris comes India ambergris, which comes from the inner coast of India and is transported to Basra and other places. After it comes the Zanj ambergris, which comes from the coast of the Zanj. This is what Al-Tamimi mentions in Perfume for the Bride. He ranks Zanji ambergris after Shirhi ambergris and even puts Zanji ambergris after Indian ambergris. Al-Tamimi said, from India comes a kind of ambergris called Al-Kark Balus, named after a group of Indians known as Al-Kark Balus, who import it and take it to a place near Oman, where sea merchants buy it from them. Al-Tamimi said, as the ambergris, Maghrebi ambergris, it is inferior to all these kinds. It comes from the sea of Al-Andalus, and merchants carry it to Egypt. It is similar in color to Shirhi ambergris, and so they sometimes cheat with it. Ahmad B. Abi Yaqub said, a group of people knowledgeable about ambergris told me that it occurs in the hills of various colors that grow on the bottom of the sea. The wind and the force of the sea during heavy winter rains because it rises up. For that reason, it is scarcely possible to get any in the summer. Now, of course, there is a reason, of course, why the people of this region are so concerned between mixing geography and trade, because that's one of the main reasons why it's invented. Al Yakubi is actually one of the first people to mention lands as far as West Africa by name, Ghana, of course. He mentions this when mentioning the theory of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah. But that is another concern. What we need to talk about now is how to get to China. So, when getting to China, he explains how you do it when crossing the seven seas. And it's better to read it than for me to explain it. The land of China is an expansive one. One who wishes to travel to China crosses seven seas, each of which has a color, odor, fish, and wind not to be found in the sea that follows it. The sea of these seas is the Sea of Persia, which one travels beginning at Serif. Its terminal point is Ras al Jumjuma, which is the strait where divers fish for pearls. The second sea, which begins at Ras al Jujuma, is called Larawi. It is a great sea. In it lie the island of the Wakwak and other Zanj people. And on those islands there are kings. This sea can be navigated only by the stars. It has enormous fish. In this map, we have Wakwak located near Africa, and we know that Wakwak is at least written about since this century, so 800s, and later written about by Al Hind and so many other books that you find depicting this Wakwak. So Wakwak must have been a real place, but we have no idea where it was. We know that it was off of the coast of Africa. Two problems. One, we do not know if these people were Javanese. In other words, we don't know if they came from Java, so if they were Indonesians, or if they were Black Africans. But what we do know, based on what he said, is that he interpreted them as Zanj people. We can easily see this when he writes, "It is a great sea. In it lies the island of Wakwak and other Zanj peoples." So, in his opinion, the people of Wakwak are Zanj too, and these people use the stars to navigate to China. But as a thorough historian, he leaves nothing to the imagination. If we see his next line, he talks about the frontier of the kingdom of Abyssinia, and he says the frontier of the kingdom of Abyssinia is the land of the Zanj, and they have contacts with Sind. Now, here's the question: what is Sind? Well, in order to answer this, we'd have to look it up, and it's very simple. I mean, I'll tell you right now, it's Pakistan. So, as you see here, he mentions that the people of Sind are related to other Asians, and they were called the sons of Noah through Japheth. So you see here, no single land can hold you, given the division of your languages. They said, "Divide the land among us." So he divided them. The progeny of Japheth, son of Noah, received. Now listen to all of these lands: China, India, Sind, which is Pakistan, the lands of the Turks, so Turkey, those of the Khazars, Tibet, the land of Bulgars, Dalam, and the territory adjoining Khorasan. The king of the sons of Japheth at the time was Jamshad. So you see here the lands that are being depicted as belonging to the people of the Asian territories. Sind is in there. Sind is part of, well, it's a separate part of India. It's Pakistan. It's not part of India, but it's Pakistan. For anyone confused, I want to make sure that I depict for you Sind and the Swahili coast. Highlighted there is only Kenya, which is only a piece of the Swahili coast. And then over there is Sind, which wouldn't be as big as it is today, obviously, because of change of territory. So you have Pakistan over there and you have the Swahili coast. And according to Al Yaqubi, 890 AD, that's when he died, these people made regular travels, the Zanj made regular travels to Sind. To this day, Sind is still used, but mainly for a province within Pakistan. But it historically comes from this name. The region today, which is still called Sind, is the Mohenjo-Daro region. So where the civilization of Mohenjo-Daro was found. Now, it's possible that this trade between Africa and these people has been going on for thousands of years. It's just there was no one to write about it on either side, or the Indians did write about it, but we still haven't translated their language, so what does it matter? So, continuing, and other similar lands, they also have contacts with people other than the Zanj in the lands bordering Sind and including the Kirk, who are a noble people who live in harmony. So as you can see here, he's giving us a very full description of where you're going to find black people during his time. So now he's depicting the East. So he's saying from the East, you can find black Africans located in Africa. Moving east, they start to embrace or land on islands all the way to Sind and Kirk. The land named Kirk in this depiction is thought to be Kurdistan, as there's a word Kirk meaning the specific region. So they think that he was talking about here. But of course, it's not as close to Pakistan as we would expect, which is why some people have interpreted as much further east. Anyway, he then details the black Africans on the African side, so west of the Abyssinians. So in a weird way, he's kind of put the Abyssinians in the center of Africa. So we continue to read. As for the black peoples who went west and headed towards Maghreb, keep that in mind. As for the black peoples who went west and headed towards the Maghreb, Passing through various lands, they established several kingdoms. The first of their kingdoms was that of Zagawa, who settled in a place called Kanem. This is that Kanem Bornu that we keep talking about. They live in cane huts and do not have cities. Their king is called Kakari or Kakira. One branch of the Zagawa is called Hadaban, and these people have a king who is from Zagawa. There is another kingdom. It its people are called the Malal. They are hostile to the ruler of Kanem, and their king is called Mayusi. Again, none of this stuff has to be guessed at because he gives us clear clues of exactly what he's talking about. So, for example, when it talks about the descendants of Noah, so we can just skim past that part. When the descendants of Noah dispersed from the land of Babylonia, the descendants of Ham, son of Noah, set out to the Maghreb and traveled from the bank of the Euphrates towards the land of the setting sun. When they crossed the Nile, the descendants of Cush, son of Ham, they were the Ethiopians and the Sudanese, split into two groups. So you can see here, he already says in Africa, Ham, two people split from Ham, the Sudanese and the Ethiopians. One group of them, the Nubians, the Busha, the Ethiopians, and the Zanj, traveled due south. And one group, the Zagawa, the Kaku, and the Meroan, the Maranda, the Kakao, and the Ghana, headed west. As for the Nubians, when they came to the west bank of the Nile and went beyond the kingdom of the Copts, who were the descendants of Bisar, son of Ham, son of Noah, they established their sovereignty there. This is going to be part of the second video that I'm talking about, where I'm going to talk about the belief of the Arabs and why they believed that basically everyone in Africa was black. Now, that's just the basics of 800 AD. So we haven't even started moving forward in the dates. If we move forward just a little bit, let's go to the 1300s. So again, in the 1300s, Europeans were still looking for Prester John. They were unaware. They had never really traveled anywhere close to Africa. They still had not. So the king, Enrique, had still not gone to West Africa. So there was all kinds of myths about blemmies and everything. But yet here's an account, and this is from the journal of the Ethiopian king who sent an envoy or sent a group of people to the European lands of Spain to aid them. Now, first, this is Wikipedia, by the way. So, Wikipedia has this depiction in there. In 1306, Wedem Arad sent an embassy of 30 envoys to Europe seeking the king of the Spaniards, probably Castile and Aragon. Perhaps hearing of the Christians' success against Al-Andalus in Iberia, Wedin Arad sought to negotiate a mutual defense pact with them against their common Muslim enemies. Whether or not the envoys reached their destination is unknown, but they did visit Rome and got as far as Avignon. Delayed on their way home, they spent some time in Genoa where they were interviewed by the geographer Giovanni da Carignano. Giovanni's account of their country based on the interviews is lost, but was summarized by Jacobus Philippus Foresti di Bergamo in his Supplementum Chronicarum. This is the first text that associates the legendary figure of Prester John with Ethiopia. So I want you to understand that now it doesn't matter whether they reached or not. What matters is they knew where they were going. They were aware that the people over there in those regions were Christian, probably hearing it from other Muslims, and they could travel through these regions easily because of course they could just pay off the Muslims or they had some brotherhood with some Muslims in those areas. Now of course they had common enemy as well. This is why they were seeking these Europeans. at a time when Europeans were unaware of Africa. By the way, they were no better when it came to Asia, or even the Americas for that matter, but Asia, because in Asia is where they first put Prester John, the myth of Prester John, which is why now they say it shifted to Ethiopia because of this king, Wedem Arad, who gave hope to the idea that there are Christians in faraway lands who could aid them. The reason why they were in India is because there was a group of people in India who are Christians at this time. And there were people, first of all, the Mongols, who were Christian too. It started there, moved from the Mongols to India, from India to Ethiopia. The knowledge of Al Andalus throughout the entire Muslim world means that people from West Africa, including the Kanem empires, had regular travel towards Europe. So, in other words, you had people from Europe, from Africa, who traveled to Europe through Canem. And of course, I've mentioned a few of them already before in some of my videos. Some people from Canem who went to school in other places. Some of them went to school in the Islamic lands. So, we're talking Arabia, moving east. These people, they find home in Al Andalus. So, far apart from what the Europeans had, the Africans had a word for all of these people grouped together, and it had to do with them exactly and who they are. So, of course, the Kurds, they had their own name for them, they had their own name for each type, but the joining word was Mzungu. So, the word Mzungu meant a white person of any kind, so Arab, European, any of those. This comes together when we look at the history of the European Vasco da Gama, who decided to move down to Africa. This is slightly after the Enrique the Navigator. When he moves down, nothing, nothing should indicate that someone as low as Mozambique should know what a Turk is. Think about that in your head. Nothing at all in the head of the European had ever thought that as low as Mozambique, I guess I should put Mozambique on here. Now remember, Mozambique did not exist to the Europeans until Vasco da Gama got there, and it was an island off of this. This is the country Mozambique, but this wasn't the Mozambique that was being talked about. It's an island just offshore of this region. And then, of course, Turkey, not the same as this entire land, but close enough, right? So these two places, according to Europeans, should be unaware of themselves, unaware of each other, but were aware of each other, at least in one direction. The Zanj were aware of the Ottomans, but the Ottomans were not really aware of the Zanj. The book written about the trip, that was a diary, step by step, that they took, tells of the Portuguese people landing in an unknown place, which they use the native names, so Melinda, Mozambique, and so many other names for the people. And because the people living in Mozambique were not ready or did not expect the people from the Christian side to land in this area, they assumed that the people were from Turkey, as we read here. All this happened at the time when he took us for Turks or for Moors from some foreign land. For in case we came from Turkey, he begged to be shown the bows of our country and our books of law. But when they learned that we were Christians, they arranged to seize and kill us by treachery. The pilot whom we took with us subsequently revealed to us all that they intended to do if they were able, what they intended to do if they were able. Now, I must clarify that it wasn't because they were Christian that they were coming after them. It's because they lied about being Muslim. And we know this because in Malindi, we can find Christians in that area. So we read, as the Christians in that country are at war with the Moors, the Christian merchants in the town are only temporary residents and are held in much subjection, they not being allowed to do anything except by the order of the Moorish king. It pleased God in his mercy that on arriving at this city, all our sick recovered their health, for the climate air of the place is very good. After the malice and treachery planned by these dogs had been discovered, we still remained on Wednesday and Thursday. So you can see here that there is a giant play of Christians. Now remember, there are Christians in this region, but they fall into the Ethiopian type Christians.